I am a little fantasied out. I'm ready to be rooted back in reality for a bit. So I thought that now would be a good time to knock out a few nonfiction reads. This, poor boy Joe is just trying to get by and trying to live in this world where he's so different from everybody else.
I understand the drive. I feel like I relate to Joe a lot.
It's so strange because now that I'm looking for information about this topic, about Operation Paperclip, it's everywhere. It's hidden in plain sight. I have been listening to the anxious generation. Our kids are mostly experiencing a phone-based childhood where they're not really interacting outside of their screens hardly at all. This developmental period of free play is crucial for child development. It teaches kids how to resolve conflicts on their own. It teaches kids how to communicate on their own. People who were born in the 60s and 70s, they were allowed to play outside by themselves. They got on school buses by themselves or walked themselves to school. They were able to learn how to make responsible decisions from a very young age. I know that this book has controversial takes. I've not gotten to those yet. I personally don't understand the outrage and offense to the book. There is one small section that talks about transgender issues among kids and youth. That being said, I personally think that it could have been left out of this book. Crazily increasing numbers of PSB in boys and girls starting as early as, you don't even want to know how early, really early. I feel like that is an issue that would have been super relevant in this book. Hey everyone, how are we doing? My name is Bree, and I like to read and react to books on the internet. It's kind of therapeutic for me, I guess. It's almost like a reading diary, a reading vlog, if you will. After finishing a couple of fantasy sci-fi series, I recently read the the trilogy, then I read the Cruel Prince trilogy. So I've been on a trilogy kick lately. I'm apparently all about the trilogies. I think I really like trilogies because it gives me more time to invest in a story. So usually by the end of a third or fourth book, I'm 5-star. Just because I'm so invested at that point. But I am a little fantasied out. I'm ready to be rooted back in reality for a bit. So I thought that now would be a good time to knock out a few nonfiction reads. I have recently started a book called The Boys in the Boat, which has been on my TBR for a few months now, and I just haven't had a chance to get to it. I'm about 100, maybe just 100. I'm about a quarter of the way through. Follows the story of a young man named Joe Rance, who's the primary character at this point. And we kind of start out with his life growing up during the Great Depression and his tumultuous upbringing, which is his upbringing is so sad. It really harkens back to a time when blended families were not a thing. It was socially taboo and misunderstood to be a part of a blended family. And really his dad and his stepmom's inability to cope with that. To me, it felt very much like it was rooted in insecurity and immaturity. But I am trying not to enforce my modern day values and beliefs onto a time period basically 100 years ago. But it's hard not to because, unfortunately, a poor young boy was the victim of this and had to fend for himself and literally fight to survive the Depression. Anyways, he grows up, he kind of fends for himself for a couple of years, and manages to get himself into Washington University, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, on I want to say it's a rowing scholarship, but I think it is a rowing scholarship. I think he went for rowing, and that's how he was able to afford college. Anyways, he gets in on a rowing scholarship, and essentially this story follows the trajectory of this rowing team and how they ended up winning Olympic gold in the 1936 Berlin Olympics. 1936. What's going on in 1936? And we're in Berlin. And this is an American group. So lots of things that are super fascinating sociopolitically. The aspect of describing the strength and endurance that it takes to row, and the energy expenditure that it takes to row. It's described in the book that just a few minutes of these boys rowing, let's say I think it was like a 4-minute row, is the energy, this equivalent energy expenditure of playing 2 full basketball games, which that is insane. That is insane. And the level of synchronicity, they have to be in sync. Is synchronicity a word? Am I wording correctly? They have to be completely in sync with one another, almost like a band or a musical group, just completely, fully in sync in rhythm. And just the technical aspect of the rate of the row versus the power of the row. It's super fascinating. I love it. And then of course there's the school rivalry. So we have so many relational dynamics. And then of course this, poor boy Joe, who is kind of the foundation, the root, the human root to this whole story, is just trying to get by and trying to live in this world where he's so different from everybody else, and he's not really accepted, and people just think of him as a bumpkin. And it's so good so far. It's pretty long. So first of all, you see the margins of a normal book are you got an inch or so of margin. This book has no margin. The margin is a 1/4 of an inch or something, maybe less. So that's kind of throwing me off a little bit. I feel like the page count is a lot higher actually because of that. The book itself is almost 400 pages, but I'm if we had some traditional margins, I feel like this book would be 500 or 550 if I had to take a wild guess. That is the first book we're reading. I'll touch base once I complete that book, or if maybe by the halfway point or two-thirds of the way, I decide that, there's enough to talk about, I'll do that too. After that, I have a couple other books on my TBR that I want to read. I've really been wanting to read The Anxious Generation. I've had that book on my TBR for a while, just as kind of as something to read that's kind of related to my field regarding child welfare and children's advocacy. So that book was kind of brought to my attention for that purpose, but then I've heard some conflicting reviews on it, and I've heard that it is actually pretty controversial in regard to particularly how it discusses LGBTQ and transgender issues in particular, which the topic of transgender issues, particularly among children, is really fascinating to me. I really like hearing and understanding both sides. So I'm kind of curious to see which way this book leans. I also have a book that I want to read for my in-person book club. I missed our last book club meeting because I had an emergency surgery, which you can find out all about in my last video. Essentially, I went into emergency surgery for an ectopic pregnancy, and I missed that meeting. And as a result, I found out a couple days later that they had picked a book called Project Paperclip, which, if anybody is familiar with Project Paperclip, the long and short of it is that after World War II is kind of an agreement between the U.S. government and the National Socialist Party. Multiple former Nazis were brought over to the U.S. government to participate in our government bureaucracy, particularly agencies like the CIA or the FBI. NIH, I believe, was a pretty big one because had done so many experiments on humans. So, unfortunately, they had gained a lot of information from those experiments, as terrible as they were. Anyways, it's all about how essentially our government was infiltrated by. So that's great. We love that. Just kidding. That was hard sarcasm. I hope that was clear. So I do have that book on my TBR. And then I also have a memoir actually that my mother-in-law purchased on my Audible. And once she finishes that, I kind of want to give that a listen / read as well. Basically, I wish I knew the guy's name off the top of my head, but he played Black Hawk in the Avengers, and he sustained a very traumatic brain injury. From what I was told by my mother-in-law, his head was run over and his eyeball popped out of his skull. If that's not a traumatic brain injury, I don't know what is. So this book, if I were to take a gander about what it is about, I believe it is about that particular experience. My mother-in-law, I know she wouldn't mind me mentioning that she also has a brain injury. And I think anything that I can read to kind of help me understand that experience a little bit more is a benefit. So those are that's a lot of nonfiction, 3 just kind of straight nonfiction and 1 memoir that I would like to read. I think I will kind of just kind of read by my mood though, just kind of pick as I go, especially when it comes to nonfiction. I do have to be in the right mood, and I will not be successful if I try to force myself to read something I'm not ready to read at that moment. It'll definitely be playing this by ear. But I am already in the middle of The Boys in the Boat and plan on reading and finishing that first before I move on to the next one. So, speaking of, I'm going to go read.
I am about halfway through The Boys in the Boat, and I understand. I understand the drive so much. Obviously, I am not a super athletic person with my leg braces and muscular dystrophy, but I have worked so hard to even just maintain what I have, working out every day for about 5 years now. I did definitely build strength, which is completely paradoxical to this condition to begin with, and I'm just now in the last year starting to notice progression. All I know is if there is a cure, if there is anything out there, they say that once it starts and once you start losing muscle, you can't get it back. And I just feel in my soul that is bullshit. It's not necessarily easy to build back what you lose, but god damn it, if it's possible, I can do it. And I will not fail. And I feel like that's the same mindset that these boys have to have, just fighting through the excruciating pain, really just kind of putting themselves through torture in order to achieve the goal that they want. And I am of a very similar disposition. I have recently started taking a supplement that is basically the protein that my body is missing. So, really, in essence, my condition, it's not really a disease, it's a deficiency. My body's deficient in 6SL. There's a longer name for it that I can't remember or pronounce. And the hope is that with introducing that nutrient, that I don't know if it's a vitamin, it's a protein actually. Your body produces it actually out of glucose, but mine does not. So the hope is that this will cure or delay, mitigate the deficiency. I'm just so obsessed with these boys. I feel like they're literally like boys. They have to I feel like they're all between the ages of 17 and 22. And they're so driven. And Joe, I feel like I relate to Joe a lot. Definitely didn't have as terrible of an upbringing as he did, but there were definitely struggles. I think a lot of people can relate to that. And just that drive to really prove yourself and make a name for yourself and make a place for yourself in the world. So I'm feeling for Joe. Stories like this just get me. Just the one in a million, the what if. Joe, what are you doing? Things while I'm driving. Today is Tuesday. I've got about an hour and 15 minutes left in The Boys in the Boat, and I just got to a part where the narrator is kind of describing the dynamics of the boys who are on the rowing team for the United States, and just the kind of what's it called? Imposter syndrome that all of them have, that they all described later in life. Like all 8 of these boys felt like, you know, they were just among these gods basically, and that they were the weak link that had to do everything they could not to fail the rest of their teammates. And it's just it's so sad, but also such a universal feeling, a feeling like you don't belong, or feeling like you're just kind of waiting for the rug to be swept out from under you. And there's just, the stakes are so high. We're currently in Germany, and this is pre-World War II, but it seems like, so that the Nationalist Socialist Party is already, it already exists. Hitler is already in power at this point. And I think people are realizing that, like, it's really bad, but I don't think people realize just how bad yet. Like, people are concerned, particularly Jews in Germany are concerned. And these boys, like, they come to Germany and they don't see any of the negativity and any of, like, the anxiety and fear, because it's all been, like, cleaned up. Like, there's been, like, a cleanup crew in Germany, basically, like, just kind of cleaning up the streets, cleaning up the, I don't even know, like, how you clean up the culture for these games. But I mean, you have people from all over the world coming to participate in these games, and it's just, like, it's weird, because, like, it's just such, like, a dissonance, like, the hate that is kind of bubbling, but the experience of these boys is so different. Like, everybody is so nice and so sweet and, like, friendly and excited to see them. And little do they know, in just, what is it, like a year or two, that everything will be totally different. And a lot of these people will be at war. I'm actually kind of curious to know, like, as we get to the end of the book, like, if there'll be any mention, like, if any of these boys ended up fighting in World War II. Because they'd be a little old. So probably not, but maybe. I don't know. It's so, it is really good. It's really interesting. And it's just crazy to hear about, the way that propaganda was used in entertainment. I wish I could remember the woman's name that they talked about a lot, but there was, like, this woman who kind of rose up in the Nazi Party, who was, like, a movie star, and she also did, like, a lot of, like, producing and directing and stuff, and she used her platform in the film industry to disseminate propaganda during this time. So it's interesting. It's interesting, and just so, like, it's just like this convoluted web of lies and misinformation and propaganda that is really, like, just slowly infiltrating this country. So crazy. I want to finish it this afternoon when I walk Jug, and then I think I'm going to start Operation Paperclip after that. I've decided. I don't have my audio book version yet, but I do have a ebook on Libby that I'm going to start, just because I feel like it'll be interesting to get, like, not both sides, but, like, both ends, rather, like, the time frame wise ends of this global conflict. Like, right now I'm reading a book about the beginning, or honestly, like, pre-World War II, before it's even really begun. And then Operation Paperclip is primarily about the aftermath and what happens to key political leaders in the National Socialist Party post World War II. So I think that'll be kind of like an interesting like juxtaposition. So I'm excited.
There we go. I was getting so tired of all of the wind noise in my videos, so I'm putting this thing back on and hoping for the best. So I have officially finished The Boys in the Boat. It was amazing. Definitely, I would say a 5-star read for me. I feel like there were definitely some points that were a little bit slower. I feel like this is an issue a lot of the time with nonfiction when you want to tell a story as accurately as possible, especially when it comes to sports stories and just kind of like the sequence of events leading up to like this kind of critical point at the end. There's so many games, there's so many competitions that they all kind of blend together at a certain point, and the stakes just don't feel as high because of that. It did feel like it was a little dry at points, but I was completely invested. I loved all of the cast of characters, all these boys, how dedicated they were to their sport, to their team. I guess how they really, just work together to take the Olympic gold. I think with a lot of sports stories, there is that team element, but the point is made in The Boys in the Boat that rowing in particular, there's not just like one person who can kind of like carry a team or like one or two people who can carry a team. It really takes every single person performing at their peak level every single second in order to succeed. And if there's even one flaw in the rhythm, in the timing, in the strength, if there's one flaw, one moment of weakness, it can throw off the entire race. It just felt like the stakes were extra elevated because of that. I really did like too, it was brought up at one point how those stakes really weighed on each of the boys. They all kind of, continued to meet up regularly throughout their lives up until the very end, and at a certain point they all kind of admitted to one another that at that time they all saw themselves as like the weak link or kind of like the imposter who, didn't really belong and was just kind of, among this amazing group of other boys who were peak performers, who were basically like gods among men. And they just considered themselves lucky to be among them and to basically be carried by this team. They all felt this way. And they all felt like the weight of that and of performing completely perfectly so that they didn't let their team down. Just that sense of brotherhood that they had, and the fact that they continued to get together and remain basically like family for their entire lives it was really cool. I've kind of talked about already the propaganda element in Germany and just kind of the the manipulation and the way that Germany just kind of swept everything up overnight for the Olympics and put on this basically just like a mask of what was really going on in order to try to convince the world that they were doing great and that things were being blown out of proportion and they weren't crazy. Of course, it wasn't like the main focus of the story, but I did like how it was kind of like sprinkled in throughout the entire book, like the way that things were shifting in Germany and the way that the idealism and the like fascism was developing during this time, and kind of how the Olympic Games kind of like became a part of that in a way. It was very good. I would highly recommend it. I do want to watch the movie. Oh, I almost forgot. I did feel like the stakes were a little bit higher at the end because there was one of the crewmates who ended up getting severely sick right before the race. And it really felt like there was no hope left, and there was no way that the boys could win without this one member of their team, because he was so sick and could barely get out of bed. The way that they handled it and the way that it all played out in the end was really neat. I don't want to give anything away, so I won't say who it was. I just felt like the author did a really good job of kind of like weaving these different aspects of the story together, kind of weaving in a little bit about Germany, a little bit about the Great Depression in America and how it was affecting families, and in particular, Joe Rance, who is kind of like the anchor of the story. He's the character that we continually kind of go back to, and kind of he's like the focal point of the story. There's an element of the boat making and a particular businessman who makes the racing boats. And we kind of get a little bit of insight into how the boats are made and how he kind of thinks about and almost like idealizes his profession in a way, or romanticizes it and romanticizes these boats. I will say, like, I feel like it was a little bit awkward in the audio, but I do listen at like 1.35 speed, 1.5 speed. So I feel like maybe I just don't get like the necessary pauses that kind of like act as a transition. So that could kind of, that might have been part of my like, issue with kind of transitioning over to like different topics. But it was a lot easier to kind of see and feel those transitions and how they were supposed to feel when I was reading the physical book. I'm really glad that I read it. It was really, really good. And I would highly recommend it, despite how long it is. Anyways, The Boys in the Boat, pretty much a perfect book. I have honestly really been struggling with a lot of the fiction I've been reading lately. Like, I don't want to, put anybody's reading tastes down by any means, but I don't know. For me, and kind of, reading the books that I'm reading now, the fiction in particular that I'm reading now versus the fiction that I was reading 10, 15 years ago, like, it is just not on the same level. Like, it feels so mediocre, so almost like degenerative in a way. Like, it's just, it's not good. And I'm just baffled by the types of books that are going so viral and getting so popular. And again, like, this isn't to hate on anybody's taste or say, like, I'm not saying that, like, you're a stupid idiot if you read these books. Like, I obviously read these books. Like, I love Fourth Wing. And I'm not sorry. But I am just saying, like, overall, it does feel kind of weird to me that literature has just really feels like it's gone downhill, in my personal opinion. And maybe it's just because I'm reading the wrong books. That's probably true. Like, I'm probably reading the wrong books. And this to me, felt like such a breath of fresh air, and felt like something worth reading, in my opinion. Like, it just felt much more enriching. It felt like I was able to learn something, but from a very like human standpoint, and have like a human anchor around a story in order to give some of like the historical context a lot more meaning. And it was just amazing. It was really well done. And I'm really kind of enjoying this like nonfiction kick that I'm on right now. So, speaking of, I am on to 2 new books actually. I have started Operation Paperclip, and oh boy, is it depressing. I think I've kind of given like a premise of Operation Paperclip already, and kind of what it is about and who in particular it is about. And to me, like, kind of getting into like the first few chapters of this book. First of all, this book is like 700 pages. It is so long. God help me as I try to finish this book. I'm only like 50 pages in, like less than 10% of the way through. But anyways, I've gotten through, I think, like 5 or 6 chapters. It's talked a lot about, the Holocaust and the horrendous conditions that people were subjected to, and the horrible experiments that were done that are honestly kind of the premise of this whole issue, this whole Operation Paperclip, and how the technology and the information that was gathered in Germany during World War II was basically just taken over by, I'm assuming, mostly the Americans. The way that it's kind of framed up so far is that Germany um, had developed technology that was kind of like state of the art at the time. Particularly, I think it was their rockets were really good, and the Americans, Brits, and Russians were all kind of like gathered together in a way to like try to find this information. So the rocket technology was one thing. There was a chemical technology that they were kind of looking for that was just like this extremely, basically like corrosive agent that like even a single drop of it was like a nerve agent and it would just kill you. And then biologics as well, and vaccine development in particular, which was one thing that was like horrendously experimented with unwilling and probably unknowing test subjects. But anyways, so they're kind of looking for this technology, and it's weird because they're kind of like in this buddy system right now where they're all kind of working together, but they're also in competition for this information. So it's really kind of setting the stage for this basically like technological arms race that we do kind of get into in like the 50s with the Cold War, 50s, 60s, 70s, like the never-ending Cold War, and how this kind of fear-based frame of mind is kind of the driving force and the rationale for why these Nazi leaders were brought over to America in order to bring the Americans ahead. So that's depressing, but very interesting, I guess. It's so strange because like now that I'm like looking for information about this topic, about Operation Paperclip, like it's everywhere. Like you can find it everywhere. There's so many books. It's all over the internet. Like this isn't like some hidden conspiracy. Like this isn't some like misinformation, whatever. It's not it's not hidden. It's like hidden in plain sight basically. Like you have to know it's there in order to look for it. Because like I had never heard this concept until one day when it was brought to my attention in Kennedy's book actually. And from then on it's like, okay, yeah, this is everywhere. This is heavily documented. This is real. Again, I'm really curious to see what my book club thinks about this book and if they even finish it. Because I mean, on the one hand, like it's heavy and depressing, but on the other hand, it's like if I have the information, it'll protect me, right? I've also started, so I have Operation Paperclip on my Kindle, and my loan for the audiobook actually just came in today, so I do have the audiobook available now. But before I start that audiobook, I have been listening to The Anxious Generation. And this one, it's weird to be like tandem reading these like very different but like equally depressing nonfiction stories. But The Anxious Generation certainly feels, of course, very relevant because it's, kind of about our modern situation, but so relatable because it kind of talks about like the difference between the millennial generation that was kind of raised before the onset of modern technology, really before there was easy access to the internet and smartphones, and then the Gen Z generation who was born basically at the turn of the century and is the first generation to be born into this technology and have access to it essentially from the time that they're born. And what's really funny for me is that I'm literally born like the right in between generations. I was born in 95, and like depending on what resource you're looking at, you could say I'm either a millennial, a super young millennial, or a very old Gen Z. So I'm kind of like literally right on that line. I remember, when I was younger, when I was like 4 or 5 years old, like we had a home computer, but like I think we still had dial up. Like you couldn't just like get online in, 5 minutes and like look something up. Like the internet was not this sort of like dopamine minefield that it is now. It was not nearly as interesting. We had like Frogger on our computer and AOL, and that was it. Ask Jeeves, if anybody remembers Ask Jeeves. And then as I grew up, like, I was introduced to like the flip phone in like 6th and 7th grade, and we had like the T9 system where like you were super cool if you could do like the T9 super fast on your phone. And then, the iPhone came out, I think when I was junior high or high school, like, and like the Instagram came out when I was in high school, Twitter. So it was like all super new technology. It was not nearly as developed and corrosive as it is now. Like it was still obviously very addicting. Like kids were on these apps all the time, but it was not like it is now where you have like this endless feed that just feeds you into the bottom of the abyss. I remember when I was in high school, like my Twitter would tell me like you're all caught up now. And that was it. That was the bottom of your feed. So like the doom scrolling was less pervasive. I feel like there was definitely still like the social pressures to like perform and have like lots of likes and lots of friends on Instagram and Twitter. Facebook was already kind of like phasing out because all of our parents were on there. So Facebook was not nearly as cool, but everybody was on Instagram with our, little school selfies. And a lot of us were on Twitter too. This book, again, like it feels so relatable because, again, like I'm right on that line where like I've watched this technology throughout my whole life, basically. And I feel like being born when I was still super fortunate to have like real life experiences growing up, what the author calls kind of like a play-based childhood, whereas nowadays our kids are mostly experiencing a phone-based childhood where they're not really interacting outside of their screens hardly at all. And it is sad. Like it's sad for me to see that with among kids nowadays. Like I see it, especially in younger kids, like, kind of like the iPad kid, or what do they call it? Not iPad, the tablet kid. And how these kids oftentimes have trouble communicating or understanding emotion or regulating their own emotions because they're just not learning how to do it. They're not interacting in real life with other people. I think it's interesting because I've definitely heard the arguments that the author is kind of rejecting, and it kind of felt like it gave the issue more nuance than I'm kind of realizing. He brings up, how there's this argument that, of course, our nation's youth is more anxious and depressed than ever because they're dealing with all of these political issues. Our economy is terrible, and the climate is ending, and just like all of these things that all of these arguments that are brought up to suggest that they're affecting our youth's mental health. School shootings, 9/11, like all of these things are brought up as like, well, you can point to all of these things too. It's not just the technology that's causing this. Like, we don't know what it is. And he kind of calls bullshit on that because he's like, okay, well, if that were the case, first of all, you would see these spikes of mental health issues during these times. Like, you would see it in 2001 after 9/11. You would see it in 09 during the financial crisis. Like, you would see these spikes after these events, which you don't. And he also argues that that's essentially just a terrible argument anyways, because that's not how trauma and mental health works, which I do definitely agree with him on this as somebody who, again, like is kind of in this field of child welfare, children's issues, and children's advocacy. When people experience a trauma collectively, like when there's a collective trauma, like an event that happens, a natural disaster, a terrorist attack, a financial crisis, these moments, like, yes, they're scary and they're devastating, but you're not going to have the impacts of trauma that you would in more isolated incidents, because communities come together and can experience this collective trauma together, and it actually is protective against post-traumatic stress disorders. Like, you're still going to have like the post-traumatic stress, but you're not going to have like the long-term disorders generally, because again, you heal together as a group. Another example of this that you see a lot is in combat soldiers, like active duty soldiers, frontline soldiers who have experienced combat, or even anybody who has experienced combat. When soldiers who experience a traumatic event in combat see a lot of death, see a lot of horrible things happen, you see them experience less trauma when they can process that trauma together afterwards. They're in their group for months or years after these events happen. They process, they cope. They're with other people who know what they've been through on a totally like intimate level. Like, they were also there. They know what the other members of their group are going through, and it's protective against trauma. However, when you have these same instances of acute, extreme violence and trauma, if you take the soldiers away from each other, put them back in civilian life too quickly or immediately, as oftentimes happens, especially if like there's an extreme injury and a soldier is whisked away, they're isolated. They're not around their brothers and sisters who were there and who can completely understand what they're going through. And that is often where you see problems start to arise. And it's the same with the internet and kind of the isolated experience that our modern youth have. They're experiencing these issues alone, these traumas alone, sometimes kind of like small traumas online, sometimes bigger traumas, and they don't have anybody who fully understands what they're going through. That isolation breeds a lot of problems. He also argues in the book that starting in the 80s, our society has kind of shifted away from what he calls a free play based childhood. So, like free play, unsupervised play, which on the surface you would think is probably a good thing, because free unsupervised play of children is dangerous, which it historically actually was pretty dangerous. Like there were predators around. The 70s and 80s was ripe with like serial killers. Like that was a thing. But nowadays, actually, he argues that it's probably a lot safer to have free unsupervised play of children because people, A, are more aware, and B, predators have shifted online, which makes a lot of sense because it's much easier to find and groom kids online nowadays than it is to find them, playing with their friends outside. He argues that this developmental period of free play, of letting kids play together outside, unsupervised, unmitigated, is crucial for child development. It teaches kids how to resolve conflicts on their own. It teaches kids how to communicate on their own. It teaches kids how to understand and react to emotions. It teaches kids how to apologize to one another. And it teaches kids that not everything that someone says is harmful just because you disagree with it, just because it's different from something you've ever heard. And it teaches kids that just because somebody says something you don't like doesn't mean that that relationship needs to be over and that that relationship is unsavable. It teaches kids so much. And oh man, like I think about it and I'm just like, man, we were so swindled as a society, because I can without a doubt 100% say that I believe that because I experienced it. And it's so funny because he kind of he notates about like the same cognitive dissonance that adults have. So like people my parents' age, like people who were born in like the 60s and 70s, who were raised pretty much unsupervised. They were allowed to play outside by themselves. They got on school buses by themselves or walked themselves to school. They were able to learn how to make responsible decisions from a very young age. And these same people who look back fondly on those experiences and recognize the value of those experiences are the same people who freak out if they see, a kid playing outside by themselves or a group of kids playing by themselves unsupervised. So there's like a strange cognitive dissonance because of this illusion of safety. I really like this book so far. I know that this book has controversial takes. I've not gotten to those yet, so I can't comment on those yet. But from what I've read so far, like I feel like this really aligns with the kinds of things that I have learned in my field, in conferences that I've gone to and, things that I've learned about child development as I've spent more time in this field. Like it all very much aligns. We're really doing not only ourselves, but our kids a disservice by, giving them technology too soon. And it's kind of like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, you have a generation of kids who have access to this technology. So if you don't give it to your child, then like they're left out and they're often isolated in that way because they're like one of the only ones not using the technology. So like there's just all of these pressures and like it's so hard to make the right decision, and it's definitely by design. um, it is definitely, intended to make parents and caregivers second guess what to do and how to handle their child's safety. I am glad that, there is more awareness about this topic now. Like, I feel like people are starting to realize just because your child is inside and in your line of sight does not mean they're safe if they're online. In fact, they're probably less safe nowadays in your direct line of sight on their phones than they would be with their friends outside, which that is a wild thought, but I would say probably a true one. Those are my thoughts so far. Oh, I will say too, I really like how this author is really like highlighting the differences between boys and girls and how the technology is affecting them and infiltrating their brains differently. Because believe it or not, boys and girls are different. They like different things, typically, like in general. Of course, there's definitely overlap, and probably more overlap than there is like separation. But in general, boys tend to be attracted to different types of media than girls do, while girls are more attracted to social media, particularly things like Instagram and Snapchat, where they can like present their physical appearance in a certain way. We start seeing a rise in body dysmorphia, eating disorders, and kind of self-image based issues. I know so many people, myself included, mostly female, definitely not all female, who have struggled with eating disorders. And the more you're online and seeing like this presentation of like the perfect body, the perfect, beautiful face, like the more likely you are to not like what you see in the mirror. We do see this with boys some too, especially boys and men who are into fitness or bodybuilding. We see kind of body image issues and body dysmorphia. However, you're more likely to see boys and men flocking to pornography, to video games, to YouTube, Reddit, podcasts, kind of more male dominated platforms. Whereas women, kind of face unrealistic expectations regarding their own body and self image. Boys are seeing kind of more toxic and ineffectual presentations of what malehood and masculinity should look like and what sexual relationships should look like. And they're both equally harmful. It's like we're in the wild west of technology. There's no way to like really mitigate what kids have access to online. It's kind of I'm hoping, as time goes on, and we are starting to see, some like age verification on certain websites and on games in order to prevent abuse, for one thing, abuse and grooming, and also preventing kids from being able to access material that they're just not developmentally ready for. Like, it should not be a rite of passage as 12-year-olds to find Pornhub or to find the dark web and, the terrible kinds of things that anybody can look up and see online. I obviously have a lot of thoughts about this book in particular, but it is definitely because, these are things that are circulating in my mind all the time because of my job. Like, this is what I do for a living is think about, how to help children and families cope and adjust to an ever-changing modern world. I think I got it all out. I'm sure I'm missing something that I can bring back up later. But I'm sure there'll be more for me to say as I continue with this book. It is pretty short, the audiobook, especially at the speed I'm listening to it. I should be done with it in like 5 or 6 hours, I think. We'll probably finish it this weekend, I would say, during my walks and my cleaning spurts. Maybe while I'm packing because we are moving soon. So I will need to be packing all of this up in the very near future. But I think that's it for now. I think I've talked enough. Hey, I officially finished The Anxious Generation a few days ago now and have kind of been sitting on my thoughts and opinions. I have essentially concluded that I really enjoyed the book. I personally don't understand the kind of outrage and offense to the book. There is one small section that kind of talks about transgender issues among kids and youth, but it's very brief and it moves on from that pretty quickly. I will say I do feel like, as charged as that issue is, if you're going to kind of casually bring that up, you should probably justify your opinion. Essentially, the author argued rather briefly that we are seeing a rise in gender dysphoria and child transition, and he correlated it to social media and online use and kind of like this social contagion effect, which may or may not be true. I don't think personally that, that denies the existence of transgender people. I think potentially both things could be true. Transgender people exist and deserve to exist, but also maybe there's this thing we should look at, especially when it comes to children. But again, I am fully supportive of anyone who is part of the LGBTQIA plus community, and I have no issues or qualms with people who are transgender. I do think, again, two things can be true at once, and it is probably something that should be looked into from like a public health, child development standpoint. That being said, I I personally think that it could have been left out of this book and just not talked about, because there really wasn't a whole lot of substance to the argument. And again, like it's so charged right now, rightfully so, that again, like if you're going to bring those kinds of things up, you better have some evidence or something to show for it. But anyways, overall, that aside, I think that the book really hits on a huge societal conundrum that we are facing. Instead of the transgender issues, I feel like it would have been maybe better received and better awareness raising to talk about youth problematic sexual behavior, or the acronym for such, YPSB. In my, again, in my sphere of influence in my career, we are seeing a rise in youth, particularly boys, who have problematic sexual behaviors. And a lot of this has been correlated to online use, pornography access from a very young age. And although I am not a treatment provider of that issue myself, I have worked with and directly communicated about this issue with providers who do treat this specific issue. And it is on the rise, and it is happening in younger and younger age groups. It used to be an issue that was primarily among 12 to 14-year-old boys, and it generally tapers off. Like it does not necessarily at all indicate that this kid will have issues later on with sexual behavior. It's usually just at the onset of puberty. But again, with unfettered access to materials online, we are seeing just crazily increasing numbers of PSB in boys and girls, starting as early as, you don't even want to know how early, really early. I feel like that is an issue that would have been super relevant in this book. and would have played into like the kinds of topics that the author was talking about, and would have helped raise awareness for an issue that is not talked about at all. Like, it is still very like, shameful and taboo to talk about these things and to seek help for these things. Families tend to kind of try to sweep it under the rug because they think that they're the only ones experiencing this when they're not. And it just felt a little unnecessary again to talk about the transgender issues just kind of in passing. There are bigger fish to fry. I don't know. I think both issues are important, but the youth PSB one, it felt like a missed opportunity. I'll leave it at that. But yeah, it was a great book. I really loved the distinctions that the author made between how the internet has affected different age groups. Myself, for example, am I guess a young millennial. So I was kind of raised with the computer, with the technology. And I didn't really have social media until high school, which is kind of more ideal, I would say, for development purposes. We just didn't have it. I mean, there was MySpace, but I mean, you had to access it from like your desktop computer that was usually like in yours or your friend's basement. And it was like the family computer. We didn't have, smartphones that, you could just access anything you wanted. We had flip phones and T9 and text messaging, and that was about it until I really feel like high school, maybe like late junior high. But the author does talk about, how these compounding issues of mental health, anxiety, depression have just continued to snowball as technology has improved and children just have unfettered access to the internet. He did have some great ideas for mitigating problematic consumption of the internet. And this is actually something that we've been working on here in Missouri. Have age verification for adult content online, we shall say. And this age verification includes uploading your ID as well as a photo of your face to like verify like you are the person in the ID that you're uploading. And of course, there are like privacy concerns with that. However, one strategy that the author put out there to like mitigate that concern would be to have like a parental control on smartphones that can't be like altered. So like if you get a smartphone for your kid, you can program that phone to like be kind of like a kid's phone or like under 18. And that way when they try to access these sites, they're automatically blocked or at least automatically asked to like submit this documentation. It would be kind of a voluntary opt-in feature on phones, which I think is a great idea. He also suggests like he has like kind of like a timeline for internet online use beginning from birth, saying like just don't expose your kid to screens until they're 2 unless it is like some sort of like FaceTime interaction with like a family member. Then after 2, it was like education, you could show them like educational material but like watch it with your child and like interact with them while they're watching the educational show or video, which is brilliant because then you're still like they're seeing this material, but they still have to interact and learn with their parent. And then it just kind of like he continues with his trajectory. And it kind of culminates in the suggestion that kids don't get a smartphone until they are 16. And he kind of talks about how 16 is kind of like a rite of passage, anyways. You can typically get your driver's license and drive, and you get a lot more freedom when you're 16. Smartphone usage should be like the norm for that as well. The last thing that I'll kind of mention that I think is really fascinating about this book is just like this concept of social norms and how powerful they are. Even parents who don't want to give their kids this technology or like unfettered access to it are like extremely pressured to conform, because every kid has one at a certain age, and it's not 16, it's usually by middle school. So there's like the pressure to conform because of other children. The schools have taken less responsibility for like communicating with parents when something's wrong. Like, so like if a child is, sick or needs to go home for whatever reason, like kids will just like call or text their parents to come get them. Back in the old days, we would go to the nurse's office and they would, either tell us like, no, you're fine, go back to class, or they would call your parents to come pick you up. So there's that pressure as well. Like more of the responsibility is on like the child and the parent to coordinate these kinds of things. And there's a lot of just pressure to know exactly where your kid is and what they're doing at all times. The easiest and most effective way to do that is with a smartphone. Oh, and I didn't even mention the social pressure, because children pretty much have to have some sort of device in order to access all of their educational materials nowadays. It's not just pen and paper anymore, turning in a slip of paper. Like, it's all virtual now, it's all online. Again, compounding pressures and shifting social norms that are to the benefit of technology and, let's be honest, technology companies who are making a crap load of money off of our data and our internet usage. It's important to read things that you think you might disagree with. He does talk about the concept of fragility in our mindsets and how people just get so triggered by opinions that are different from their own, and opinions that they kind of perceive to be like harmful or bad. Which, I mean, you can think that somebody has, a bad or wrong opinion. I think we need to do a better job of exposing ourselves to other ideas so that we can understand each other better. Really good book. I've already kind of talked ad nauseum in my kind of last update, and I've done that again in this one. Anyways, I have about a quarter of Operation Paperclip left, and oh boy, this one is definitely a doozy. It is very good, but it is definitely harder to keep up with. Like, there's just so many people involved. Like, every chapter is like, it feels like a different set of characters. And, sometimes like a character from a chapter 5 chapters ago will kind of like make a reappearance. And I'll be like, oh, I don't really remember like what they were involved in, but I recognize their name because I read about it a couple days ago. So there's been a lot of that situation, but just overall, like, it's just a clusterfuck. Just in general, this whole operation is, rooted in justifying technological development and like how to rationalize bringing these people over from Germany after World War II. And it's just kind of like the slow creep of acceptance over the course of several years. These people were initially brought over as prisoners, they were put on trial, they were in Nuremberg, and then just slowly over time, like, give you a little bit more freedom. Actually, you could give us a little bit of information. Actually, we're going to give you it. So it's just like a slow creep of acceptance. I mean, really just like rehumanizing these people who have committed monstrous atrocities in the name of science and the chemical, biological, and I guess aviation technologies that were developed in Germany. that were brought over to America. It kind of preludes the Cold War, and there's all this talk of Russia trying to get this technology, trying to get these German soldiers to divulge information to them. The United States trying to, it's like a tug of war. It definitely precludes the Cold War fears and anxieties that existed as early as the 40s and 50s, literally existed as soon as World War II ended. It is very good, but it is definitely harder to get through, and one that I have to spend a lot of time like kind of digesting, and I have to really focus when I'm listening to slash reading this one. I do kind of like having both a ebook and audio book version, because when I'm kind of like e-reading, I can really like kind of like focus on more details, like remembering names, understanding more of the interpersonal dynamics. But then when it just gets to a point where I'm like, okay, I need to get through some of this, I can just hop in the audio and just listen to a few chapters and get through it a little bit easier. But of course, I'm not one to retain as much when I'm listening. So, but it's worked out. Anyways, that is where we are at. I'm trying to finish Operation Paperclip, and that is really the only thing I'm reading right now, except for I did start Silver Elite yesterday. I read like a chapter of that, and I'm already rolling my eyes. I'm kind of disappointed because I really wanted to like this book. I'll give it more of a chance. I'll check in soon. My hair is really growing out. I need to do something about my roots. What a ride this has been. Operation Paperclip was absolutely insane. I'm not going to lie. It was really difficult to keep up with all of the players involved. There were dozens of characters from both the German side and the US side. It was too many people to keep up with. That aside, it was a really enlightening read. Highly recommend. I would definitely read it again and maybe like try to get a little bit more from it on a second read. At this point, having read it once, kind of listening to probably about 30 or 40% of it, or reading 30 or 40% of it, and then listening to the other like half or so, my main takeaways were the realms in which these German scientists contributed to technology in the United States in bioengineering, biological weapons, viruses, bacteria, vaccines, all that. And then the chemical weaponry, the tabin, and there was another major, I can't remember what it was, but another major chemical that they created on top of many others. But those were the two that were kind of like focused on. And then the aerospace technology, and basically kind of the lead up into how these scientists contributed to the creation of NASA. The origins of NASA is basically because of these people that were brought over after World War II. There was a kind of a brief mention of LSD. That was another kind of like chemical substance that was tested for like mind control capabilities, which I think a lot of people know about that or have kind of like heard about that. The book Chaos is great. If anybody is interested in that topic in particular, I did feel like a lot of it was, there was a lot of like repeated stuff. I feel like it probably could have been shortened considerably. And kind of the way it was like woven together kind of made it a little bit more complicated. I feel like if the author had like focused on one thing at a time and kind of like talked about one story to completion and then kind of jumped to another story, it might have been easier. I can understand, I guess, kind of why she did it the way she did. I do want to listen to her interview that she did on the Joe Rogan Experience and see if I can maybe glean a little bit more about this topic from her interview with Joe Rogan. So that's kind of on my to-do list as well. And I'll probably include some of what I get from that episode in my wrap up for May. I do think I'm going to go ahead and end the video here instead of continuing on, but I am considering doing a part 2 of Nothing But Nonfiction, where I pick up with my next breath. And then I do have somewhere around here, I have The Wager that I really want to read, and Everything is Tuberculosis, which is available on my Pango Books account if anybody is interested in picking that up. It's a copy signed by John Green, but if anybody's interested in it, check out my Pango Books. I'll have it linked below. I have all kinds of other stuff on there too. Anyways, lots of great nonfiction this month. I really liked The Boys in the Boat. That might have been my favorite, although I did like The Anxious Generation too. The Anxious Generation felt a little bit more like easy for me just because it's a topic that I'm so like deeply familiar with already. So it was kind of like an easier listen, easier read. The Boys in the Boat and Operation Paperclip were very good as well. A little bit longer, more detailed. Again, but for both of them, really kind of enlightening about kind of like more niche topics. Next you see from me, I will probably be in a new space, and I will actually be taking down my bookshelves pretty soon and packing them up. So I may not be filming in this spot for a little while. My space might look a little chaotic coming up, but we'll see how that goes. I might actually film my like packing up my bookshelves. I don't know if it would be ASMR or for like a reading vlog type of thing though. We'll see. Anyways, that is going to be it for now. I hope everybody is taking care, and I'll see y'all really soon. Peace.